This is the Rike S05. Uninteresting name, but a fairly interesting knife. This is actually a belated New York Custom Knife Show acquisition for me. I was there last week. Or was it the week before? Yeah, it was the week before. Time flies. So I was there. I did a round of the show floor. Saw a whole bunch of stuff I wanted, most of which I couldn't afford. But they had this at the Rike table, and I thought this was really cool. So I circled back. I tried to pick one up. Turns out that they wouldn't take a credit card. So I had to go home and order one online. Now, I've had this for a few days now. And I have to say, it's a looker, isn't it? Obviously, the most interesting feature is this mosaic Damascus blade. It's the only mosaic Damascus I have had in my collection. So this was what really drew me to it. Now, aside from the blade, the rest of the knife is not particularly unique. I mean, it's well done, mostly. But really, it's the blade is what's makes this thing special. So before I go further, just to give you an idea of what you're looking at, I'm going to put this next to a couple of other things. So for size comparison, here's a PM2. Pretty similar in overall size. So you see a little bit less handle, but a little bit more blade. And here's a Hogue Deca, which is a little bit smaller. This has the XL size scales, so you can see that with these larger handle scales, the handle is actually pretty similar in size to the Rike, but the blade is shorter. So this is the third piece that I've had from Rike. The other two being the, what's the name of it now? Geez, I'm drawing a blank. It was that first one that they did a year back that had the upswept blade and the what looked like an integral handle. It was actually a cover plate. And I also have this one. This is actually not Rike brand, but it's Ketuo, and as far as I know, they're manufactured by Rike. Also a really nice knife. It's a lot less, I guess you could say, flashy, but you can tell that the same level of quality is there. Very smooth. So off the bat, I want to tell you, I have two big gripes with this knife. Blade's very cool and all. The first thing that I noticed when I got it in hand and started putting it in my pocket was that this pocket clip, pretty awful design out of box, and I'll tell you why. So the pocket clip sits inside this kind of, I guess you could call it a pocket. So there's this little milled out area that helps the pocket clip to sit lower or more flush with the handle. The issue with that was that out of the box, this thing was all the way down like this. So you can see that the plane of the handle here, plane of the frame, was pretty much right in line with the tip of the pocket clip. So when you try to put this in your pocket, the lip of your pants just kind of hits the tip of this and goes right over it. So you actually had to kind of use your other hand to guide the fabric of your pocket underneath the clip. So kind of like that Kaiser Doberman, you needed two hands to get this in your pocket, which was really annoying. It came out of the pocket just fine because like the tension and the shape of the clip were okay. It's just that it's sitting too low because of this milled out pocket that it sits in. So I did bend this back a little bit so it sits a little higher, and now it goes into the pocket much easier. So that's just something to be aware of if you're looking at this. The other big issue that I've had with this was actually in the packaging. So this comes packaged just like most other knives do. It comes in a box, and inside that box is a little zippered pouch. It's all very nice. But this thing was just like coated in oil. Now that is a good thing in some ways because it helps to make sure that your blade doesn't you know rust or anything while it's sitting in storage. But the problem is that there was so much oil on this, it actually had gotten into the pivot. So it was actually, I mean, I don't mean like into the pivot between where the blade sits and the bearings and all that. I'm talking about it was in the threads between the male and the female end of the pivot screw. So after only like half an hour of having this thing, that pivot was already loosening up. It was coming off center. It was affecting the detent. So I had to take it apart. Found out that the bearings are actually not captured in this. They're kind of like you have in a Shirogorov, where they're just kind of sitting in there in these holes. So if you take this apart, you got to be prepared that your bearings are going to fall out, and you're going to have to put them back in piece by piece. So kind of annoying to take apart in that sense. But I did. I put Loctite into the screw, and it didn't take. It loosened up again just a couple hours later. Well, actually, a couple hours later. I mean, I let it set, and then it still continued to loosen up. And I put more Loctite in, and at 24 hours later, it was loosening up still. And the issue is because all of that oil was stuck in those threads of the pivot. It wasn't allowing the Loctite to set properly. So I cleaned it out the best I could. I've since put even more Loctite in there, and hopefully this time it takes. And if not, then I'll have to take out the screw again, clean it out even more, and try again. But aside from that, I mean, it has good action. It is drop shut smooth. That smoothness is in part because this is actually the first knife that I have seen this on. They actually have machined into the blade a track for the detent ball. Normally when you take a knife apart, you'll see the track of the detent balls. It's really just worn in. So you'll see it kind of scratching its own path along the blade. But this one actually has a machined path for it to follow, and that's actually really nice. I'm sure it was done in part because of the texturing on the Damascus here. If you didn't have a smooth path for it to travel along, it would feel very bumpy and lumpy as you're opening and closing the knife. So they probably put that feature in. You can't really see it. You can see the detent hole right there, but that path that they machined into the blade, it's not visible from unless you actually take this apart. But anyway, so pretty unique feature. Got it back together, as you can see. Really nice action. Ergonomics. I mean, it's nothing particularly special. It's just fine. Again, to be honest, this is probably, if you buy this thing, this is probably not something you're going to have as a real user. This is more of a collector's piece due to the nature of this blade. To be honest, I have no idea what types of steel were used to create this Damascus. No idea what the hardness is. Maybe the information's out there on the internet somewhere, but I haven't bothered to look it up because I don't really plan on using this. I mean, I may carry it occasionally. I may use it to open like some very light packaging here and there, but this is a collector's piece for me and pretty much nothing else. So aside from the blade being really cool, and again, you have it's a mosaic Damascus, and if you look closely, it's actually got some very specific patterns in there. You can actually see some, I'm not sure, I assume those are like Japanese characters, kanji. There's like a checkerboard kind of pattern over here. I've seen mosaic Damascus before, but it's usually just kind of a collection of random patterns. But here you actually have specific shapes put in. Now, I don't know how they do that. I assume that whatever Damascus material that they bought and made this with was pretty expensive, hence the price of this knife, which is, I think, $550, which is more expensive than most Rike knives. We also have the Damascus back spacer, Damascus pocket clip. And you have the titanium anodized hardware, which is actually, at least these pieces, are only visible on this side. It looks like they screw directly into the frame over here. Not something that you see all that often. Yeah, that blade. So $550 for this, and in comparison, most other Rikes are typically under $400. They're usually like in the $300, $350 kind of range, and a lot of those you may see a lot more intricate machining. You might see contoured scales. This one just has flat scales. You might see some really unique mechanisms for disassembly, like on the Rike Shadow, which is something I would like to get at some point. This one is pretty much plain Jane when it comes to the assembly. It's standard assembly, flat machine. You can tell that pretty much all of the cost of manufacturing here went into the materials here, particularly this blade. Really cool. Now the blade shape is also pretty interesting. I was actually, when I saw this, I was kind of like, well, that looks a lot like the Rike Tiger. And that's something that also came out relatively recently. You can see the blade shape is very similar, where you have kind of like a thumb scoop back here, an upswept trailing point. I don't know if you want to call that like a tanto, but then you have a recurve section here. So the dimensions or the proportions of that shape are a little different on the Rike, but very similar blade shapes. And these came out like pretty close to one another last year. So kind of a coincidence. I don't know which one actually was released first. As you can see, this one is also a pretty swanky knife. I'll do a video on this one at some point. This is not the standard version of the Tiger. This is a much more limited version with zircotai scales. So yeah, this has to have a video at some point. I wouldn't even call it I wouldn't even say I could do a real review on this. This is not something I'm probably ever going to carry. This is going to be a safe queen. But anyway. So this one here, yeah, unique blade shape. And I think it contributes to the coolness of the blade. So not only do you have this really unique, interesting looking Damascus pattern, it's also a pretty wild looking blade shape. Still, I mean, a fairly functional, I mean, I see no issues with using a blade of this shape to do ordinary tasks like opening a package or maybe even a little bit of food prep. I mean, you have a lot of belly out here to do, you know, plenty of work, and the tip's nice and pointy for piercing, opening packages. And this little recurve section, again, that can be useful too if you're trying to cut through like a piece of rope or something. I have actually appreciated that. I'll tell you, I do not like recurves because I do not like to sharpen them. But I have to admit they are actually pretty useful if you're actually using them to cut through material. So I have to admit that. But again, you know, I'm not going to use this. This is going to be a collector's piece for me. I'll probably carry it occasionally. So I don't really care all that much about the utility of the blade. I'm going to try to keep it in pristine condition if I can. And as much as I love to sharpen, I probably will not be touching this one at all. So other design features, I think I've covered everything. You know, I covered the that detent track. I mentioned the fact that this actually does not have caged bearings, which is a little bit weird, but I don't know if that's part of the reason why it has such a smooth action. I mean, there are plenty of knives out there now that have incredibly smooth actions, and in many cases even at very impressive price points. So I don't really know what the reasoning was for that, to use rather than using caged bearings, why they went with bearings that are not captured. No idea why. I would think that it's easier from an assembly standpoint for them, just to use some pre-made caged bearings and put them in the knife, rather than have someone sit there, in their shop or in their factory and put in these bearings one by one. So who knows? It could just be that the designer of this knife said, hey, that's the way I want to do it. And they said, okay, we'll follow that. I have an interesting design back here where it's the backspacer floats between the two halves of the frame, and there's all this space in between. It looks kind of cool. And that is obviously a place to put a lanyard. Not that I ever do that. Another thing I think I skipped over here. So the Rike logo is, you can see it. It's a little bit difficult to see because it is on the colored Damascus pivot hardware, but they do have it, I assume, laser etched on there. Probably would have been cool if they had done this pivot screw in the same material, just to make it match, and to match the pocket clip. But that's kind of a nitpick. Again, and that's something that's really only aesthetic. Whether or not they use Damascus versus titanium on this screw right here is not really affecting the function of the knife in any way. So yeah, there you have it. Just wanted to show this off. I think that the lighting that I have here does this blade justice. You can really see the detail, and I mean, it's shiny, it's reflective. It's like the same way that a lot of manufacturers do the Damasteel blades, where it's it's mirror polished before they do the etching. So it reflects the light very nicely. And once you start looking at it, it's kind of hard to stop looking at it. It's kind of hard to put down. And it's fidgety too. So now I just have to hope that the Loctite that I most recently put in holds, and that centering stays right where it is, because that will keep the detent tuned just fine. It'll keep the blade play away. Right now it's fine. It's rock solid. And that'll keep me happy. So there it is. My belated New York Custom Knife Show acquisition. And I have to say, I'm really a fan of Rike knives. Hopefully at some point I pick up one of the Shadow models, which has a really unique method of disassembly, and I'd like to do a video on that one as well. I've seen other people do videos on it on YouTube, and I've wanted one. I've had one on my wish list for a while. So Rike knives. For those of you who haven't yet experienced anything from Rike, I can tell you that the quality is very good. The quality of the machining is excellent. They all have excellent actions. They lock up solid. The only issues that I've had with this one and the Illusion model are that in both cases, I have had to, put Loctite on the pivot. And again, that happens with a lot of knives, whether they're high-end, low-end. You are very likely at some point after you get them, you're very likely to have your pivot screw loosen up, and then you're going to have to take that out, put a drop of Loctite on it, put it back in. This one, after about a week, it started loosening up. Put a drop of Loctite in, and then it was just fine afterwards. This one's on its third round, and hopefully no more rounds. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.